Gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you. Madam Secretary, I want to begin by thanking you for your patience and your endurance during today's hearing. It's been quite a long day. And I also want to begin by apologizing for my Republican colleagues who apparently either want to write your answers for you or testify for you, because I think it fits in better with their outlandish narratives of what happened. And since they insist on criticizing you for not doing anything right, I want to talk to you a little bit more about a line of questioning that we pursued in the first round of questions. I asked you a little bit about what you were doing the night of the attacks in Benghazi, and I want to just continue that a little bit more. Now, you said previously that you had spoken with the White House that evening, with the CIA, the Defense Department, and the State Department. You also spoke directly with people on the ground at the embassy in Tripoli that night at around 7 p.m.
Did you ever personally speak to Ambassador Stevens? Did you ever personally speak to him after you swore him in May?
And I can tell from the documents that we've seen that you asked to speak with Deputy Chief of Mission in Tripoli. Can you explain the purpose of that call and why you felt that was important?
Well, for a number of reasons. They were a source of information. They had their own sources on the ground that they were reaching out to, trying to gather additional insight into what happened, what provoked it, who was behind it. But much more importantly, even than that, they were in a great state of dismay and grief. And I thought it was important to speak with our team in Tripoli directly so that they knew that we were trying as best we could from so far away to help them.
But you never talked to him personally after May of 2012 when you swore him in as our ambassador.
And to help their colleagues. We also had pushed to have an additional team of security officers fly from Tripoli, and really the embassy in Tripoli just took that on. They, in fact, probably came up with the idea and put it together and got the plane and sent more help on the way to Benghazi. But it was a very personal conversation between me and those who were in our embassy.
The fact is, we had 4 dead Americans. What difference at this point does it make?
This is a place that I'd spent a lot of time and paid a lot of attention to. As I said earlier, we had to evacuate the embassy before, while Gaddafi was still in power. I talked to those people in our embassy family as they were on the ferry going from Tripoli back to Malta. So we tried to, engage with, listen to, and support our teams when they were facing these very difficult circumstances.
Now, this committee has interviewed your staff that was with you that evening of the attacks, your Chief of Staff, Cheryl Mills, and your Deputy Chief of Staff, Jake Sullivan. And they explained that you personally participated in a secure video teleconference with senior officials from the intelligence community, the White House, and the Department of Defense. Your Chief of Staff, Cheryl Mills, told the committee that your attendance at the deputies level meeting broke with protocol and surprised other attendees, but that you simply said, quote, "These are our people on the ground. Where else would I be?" Why did you think that it was important for you to participate personally in that deputies committee meeting?
The people who were on that civets were part of the operational decision-making, and I wanted to know firsthand from them what they were trying to do to help us, particularly DOD, also the intelligence community, because at that time, as I recall, the CIA annex had not yet come under attack, and we were trying to get all Americans out of Benghazi. We were trying to provide planes for evacuation. So there was a lot of detail that was being worked out, and I wanted to be as hands-on as I could be.
I mean, obviously it was not enough.
To know, number one, what all the other agencies were doing to help us and what we could do to try to assist them in their efforts to get to Benghazi and do whatever was possible.
Were the participants surprised by your visit on the
Apparently they were, because they weren't expecting me to walk into the room and sit down at the table.
Do you think that your appearance on that teleconference conveyed to them how seriously you were taking the attacks and the response to the attacks?
I'm sure it did, Congresswoman, but we'd been sounding the alarm and reaching out for several hours by then. And we were getting a very positive response from everyone.
From
I
the
knew,
Defense Department?
yes, the
other
Defense
interagency
Department,
folks?
you know, the CIA, obviously the White House was deeply involved in reaching out and coordinating with us. So we knew people were trying to help. There was never, ever any doubt about that. I just wanted to hear firsthand about their assessments of what they could do. Could anybody get there in time? How were we going to evacuate the Americans? And we were also still unsure of where our ambassador was, which...
That started from this tropic port aboard this tiny ship. The mate was a mighty sailing man, the skipper brave and sure. 5 passengers set sail that day for a 3-hour tour. A 3-hour tour.
Made all of this incredibly difficult for everybody in the State Department. We didn't know where he was. We didn't know whether he was alive, and it was shortly after that in the evening when we found out that he was not.
Your chief of staff also explained to this committee that you were concerned the night of the attacks, not only for the safety of your team in Benghazi, but also about your teams in Tripoli and elsewhere. She said this about you, quote, she was very concerned. She was also very determined that whatever needed to be done was done, and she was worried. She was worried not only about our team on the ground in Benghazi, but worried about our teams that were on the ground in Libya and our teams on the ground in a number of places, given what we had seen unfold in Egypt. Can you explain some of the context of the evening and why you were concerned, not just about what was happening in Benghazi, but the risk that Americans were at elsewhere?
Well, that's exactly right. I was quite concerned about Tripoli because we didn't know if there would be coordinated attacks. We were still trying to gather information about who was behind what happened in Benghazi. In the course of the conversations with our team on the ground in Tripoli, began to explore whether they should move from where they were in the place that was operating as our embassy at that time to a more secure location. There were lots of considerations about what to do to keep our team in Tripoli safe. And then, as I testified earlier, we were very concerned about the impact of the video, sparking unrest, attacks, violence in a wide swath of countries. It turned out that that was well-founded concern, as we saw the attacks and protests across the region all the way to India and Indonesia. So there was a lot of effort being put into not only doing the immediate tasks before us in Benghazi and doing whatever we needed to do to keep our people in Tripoli safe, but beginning to talk through and prepare for what might happen elsewhere.
I want to switch line of questioning for just a second. I've got a couple of minutes left. Following the attacks on Benghazi, but before the Accountability Review Board completed its work, you did a number of things to evaluate and improve security at overseas posts. And this is even before the ARB had finished its investigation and issued its finding and recommendations. I know you've mentioned them multiple times today, but some of my colleagues appear to have amnesia about what you really accomplished. So can you tell me about some of the steps that you took to implement in the State Department even before the ARB completed its work?
Well, although the ARB had not completed its own investigation, clearly in the aftermath of Benghazi, we were doing our own evaluation of what had happened, what we knew about the circumstances, and what we needed to do to try to get ahead of any other potential problems. One of the decisions that I made and discussed with General Dempsey and Secretary Panetta was how we could get more assistance from the Department of Defense. And in particular, we sent out teams to the high threat posts that we had to get evaluations from those on the ground so that we would have a better idea of where there might be necessary upgrades to security that we could immediately try to act upon.
I mean, obviously, it was not enough.
So we did begin a conversation with the Department of Defense, which I think it's fair to say, and as Admiral Mullen himself testified, sees the scope of the American diplomatic presence as beyond the capacity of the Defense Department to be responsive to. So we had to begin to first look at the high threat posts, then we had to take the second layer about those that we think could become more dangerous going forward, and really begin this process, which, as I told Congresswoman Duckworth, I'm confident is still continuing, because we can't get behind the curve in being able to predict where there might be problems in the future. We had a perfect example of that in Yemen. We kept the embassy open in Sana'a under some very difficult and dangerous circumstances for a very long time. We even moved it physically to a more well-defensed position. Thankfully, we have not had incidents resulting in American diplomats being killed, but it was a constant challenge to us. And there are many other examples, like the one that Congressman Smith has raised twice, Peshawar, which is an incredibly dangerous high-threat post. So what we tried to do was to close as best we could the relationship between state and DOD. So wherever DOD could help us, they would be prepared to factor that into their planning. And I was very grateful for their responsiveness.
We're grateful for yours. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Premises that were vulnerable and threatened, of course they came to me. I had to make the decision.
That started from this tropic port aboard this tiny ship. The mate was a mighty sailing man, the skipper brave and sure. 5 passengers set sail that day for a 3-hour tour. A 3-hour tour.
And then what punishment, discipline is appropriate. That could range from being terminated to being reprimanded, and then a whole spectrum in between: suspension, loss of clearance. It's a bunch of different options.